Kind of start off with a little bit on my background. It was 25 years at Disney, Brad, not 20.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
It was a summer job. I started out, I was a lifeguard and worked operations to pay for university, moved into technology. While I was in technology, I kind of fell into the data space, probably as what would now be called a data translator, working through the multiple different systems that were in the reservation systems there at Disney. From there, I moved over to the marketing department. Disney it's actually the name has changed, but back when I was there, it was called customer managed relationship instead of customer relationship management. So if I say the acronym backwards, realize that I did it for almost 12 years. And the idea behind it was the customer managed the relationship with the organization. It wasn't us managing their relationship. But I moved into the marketing department into what we called CMR and led marketing technology from the data aspect and then from the data technology aspect as well. After that, I went over to Australia and worked for a bank called Westpac. Surprising fact, it is the 10th largest bank in the world by volume in Australia. And yet very few people have ever actually heard of it. The bank was looking to kind of shift from a product-driven organization to more of a service-driven organization. And I was brought in by the gentleman I worked for at Disney when he went over as the chief customer officer to help use data for a personalization standpoint instead of a reg and a compliance slant where it was being used at the time. Was there for 2.5 years, came home unfortunately for some family problems, and have been working for Delta Consulting, which is my own company, helping companies understand their insight strategy as we worked through that. It allowed me to spend time with my father, which was the reason I had to come home. If you think about driving growth with personalization at scale, it almost could be driving growth with insights at scale. A couple of reasons I chose personalization. One, after 25 years at Disney, the whole concept of the customer and customer service was, for lack of a better term, beat into me consistently to the point that it's your initial thought with a lot of what you do when you go through it. The other thing when I think about personalization and you think about kind of driving toward either your guest, as Disney would call them, or customer, as the rest of us would call it, is at the end of the day, that's your target. You might have a widget, you might have to do reporting, you might have to do compliance, but all that's built around however you generate your income moving forward. And having a good, solid customer relationship built through personalization helps to drive that. And so, that's kind of why I chose personalization over insights as I went through that process. Okay, hang on. One of the first things I'll say when you think about personalization is do not forget your employees. One of the key core to this piece is if you think about your employees who are customer facing, they deliver the message, they deliver the vibe, whether they are virtual or they are physical. How that customer works or how that employee works with your customer will set the tone. So one of the things I love to say, and I get in a lot of trouble for it, is, happy wife, happy life. If you can keep your customers engaged and involved, or your employees engaged and involved, they'll turn around and keep your customers and they'll do what's right for the customers as they work through the process. Now, at the end of the day is why are we thinking through this process? One of those is obviously to achieve strategic business growth through consistent return on investment. And I say the word obviously, and the other one is people will say, well, that's common sense. And one of the things I kind of like to push back on is what's common to me is not common to you. And the thing I missed for years and years and years was the strategic side of that. In other words, we would come up with solutions that were really good, but they weren't aligned to where the business wanted to grow. And because of that, the people who were actually incentivized to drive on that strategic goal were less incentivized to back something that didn't align to that. And so thinking through when you drive insights and you drive personalization, if it doesn't align to those strategic goals, then we need to step back and wonder how hard is it going to be to make sure people will support that. So aligning to strategic goals is one of the reasons that I kind of put that piece in there. To deliver great customer and employee experiences, you're building trust and loyalty. If you're consistently delivering a message that is personalized to the person, they begin to actually think those messages have value. They open them more often. Now, coming from Disney, it was easy because you have a company that there is a high level of trust in, and it's known for its customer service. The personalized side of it with that many people coming through is what we were trying to just stack on top of that. If you think of driving to a financial institution, the customer service isn't always the first thought. And so it's changing people's perceptions so that when that institution reaches out, you believe it's in your benefit and they're not fixing to hit you with the next product that they want to drop in your lap. Align the experiences to optimize utilization. I mean, you've got products you want to sell, and those experiences, while personalized, need to align to those products. And they need to make sure that the person is still, their propensity of what they want to do aligns to that as well. It just goes back to the whole trust side we were talking about earlier. And the last one is to foresee changes and trends. As people start to want something you don't have or in a different flavor, if you can uncover that earlier, you can adapt to those changes and trends and then personalize your product or your service to try to align with where they're going from there. If that makes sense, we'll move on. This, to me, is almost the entire core of everything you're doing, because if you can't measure properly, what's going to happen is you're not going to be in a position to be able to understand how you perform. And when you think of personalization and how new it is in the business environment, you've got to go and you've got to prove your value. You've got to drive what you're doing to show that it's there, because when finance has to start cutting back, the new stuff that isn't quite proven will be one of the first things they'll go after. So understanding good, solid measurement in what you're doing will help with that. Furthermore, the feedback will improve your decisioning. If you think about it, if you get positive feedback, you continue down the path. If you get negative feedback, you stop, adapt, you adjust it, and you move forward till you get the positive feedback. That loop has to be fully trusted. You can't change the numbers because it makes you look better, because then you're going to corrupt the loop as it goes through. And so the measurement is key, whether it's in the customer experience, which is, it's got a lot more than performance. Performance to me was more cut and dry. But when you think about your customer experience, a lot of people drive into the Net Promoter Score, or they use some form of experience where the customer is talking to them. Following through on that continuous improvement process, which is it's a wonderful catchphrase that people like to say. But if you think through the fact that you need to capture the information, you need to do something with the customer that was impacted, you need to cluster, or as I love to say, bucketize similar problems together. You need to understand the root cause that caused that. You need to actually prioritize and put a fix in place, and then measure if that fix took place. So the idea is you fix the individual impacted, and then you put something in place to stop it from continuously happening over and over. The next one, when we think of customer feedback, is it's not a discipline tool. And so for me, I've run into it a lot, and I don't know about you guys, but when you walk into a place, you have some issues, and the last thing the person tells you on the way out the door is, you're going to get a survey. Please rate me, not the system that failed, because the survey only reflects on me. What you've done is you've missed an entire opportunity to understand areas that are impacting the customer. And what you're trying to do is force your employees to make up for deficiencies, either in compliance and regulatory and technology. And so they're not incentivized to fix the problem. They're incentivized to gain the system, like you hear about on a fairly regular basis. It's not a discipline tool primarily. If it continues to happen with certain individuals, yes, it can be used as a discipline tool, but you should go in with honest feedback. The system crashed. Compliance says I can't help you with this because I don't have the training on it. The lines were too long, and you need to understand, why are the lines too long? Is it because of the processes you put in place? Is it just simply you're getting overloaded at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a Thursday? That you can then try to put those fixes in place. Recovery. If you think about this, if someone has a bad experience and you recover them, and it's been proven, you might get an 8 or 9 on a normal NPS score, but you get someone who's impacted and you remeasure them, they will give you a 9 or 10. The idea behind that is you're taking the time to tell them you care. You need to fix the problem, because if you have to recover 10 times for the same thing, that's stop. But the idea is, do you have a way to recover, and do you have a way to record the recovery? Do you have a way to remeasure the recovery? Because if you can do that, then you can understand who you've been able to bring back into the fold and lift their experience. Query while you're emotionally engaged. The whole idea behind this is, if you go into a bank and you make a deposit, and 2 weeks later you get an email that asks how your deposit was. I can't remember what I had for breakfast today, and you're going to ask me 2 weeks ago about a deposit I put in. it needs to be while you're emotionally engaged. You need to find a way to catch the person as walking out the door. When we were bank, we just put robotic process automation on the terminals, because if you think about most older banks, the branch equipment is legacy. The last thing you want to do is try to peel that back to get some type of real-time reporting. But we put robotic process automation on the terminals, turned it into a really expensive quarter. It captured who the customer was, it captured what their ID was, it captured the action they did, fired it off to us through an API, and we waited about 40 minutes to let them get out of the bank and hit their mobile device and said, how was the experience? And we fell back on what we call 3 stars. Either you didn't do your job, you did your job, or it was impressive. The other thing we did with that was, while we gave the customer permission to rate the experience, we also allowed the employee to rate the experience. Because of the RPA process sitting there, you could open that experience and say, we had issues because of this technology, or they were asking for something I was unable to fulfill. They didn't have to do it, because if you got a long line, the last thing we want you to do is make people mad behind you while you're documenting an experience. But it was optional that they could enter the information when they felt it necessary. So we got the employee feedback as well as the customer feedback. And that proved very beneficial. We learned different things in the process that we were able to go in and actually fix to remove impediments from the employee, which helped then the customer experience drive and reduce the employee's frustration. Tailor the questions to the experience. Recently went to a Kroger. I was walking out of the Kroger, I got the receipt. They said, win $500, you can win $500 if you fill out this survey. Now I went grocery shopping. When I went and filled out the survey, because I was curious, it took 25 minutes to fill out. I got milk and eggs. It's not a 25-minute take of my life, and bribing me with $500 to do it, you're not going to get honest answers, because after the first 2 minutes, I was just clicking the first button I could get to the next screen. If it's that type of experience, allow people to just freeform their issues or enter their information, and then leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning to try to go through that and tag what you need to understand. It helps you to prioritize who you want to recovery. It helps you understand the keywords that people are saying, and it does not require a large human effort to go through it. And you can shorten how people go in, whether it's typing or using voice. Voice is coming along quite well where we can recognize that. Here in the US, we have different accents, but you'd be surprised at the level of accents in Australia that we had to work through on the voice side. But it worked well enough that it reduced the workload on us. And so tailor your question. If you're doing a home loan, you can put a lot of questions in there, because that's usually about 4 months of someone's life with a whole bunch of forms. But if you're doing a simple deposit, you're doing a simple visit, you just did a ride, make it quick, make it easy. You know, it's almost like swipe right, just answer and move. Centralize the feedback. Now, it doesn't have to be physically centralized, but you have social, you have comments, you have complaints, you have the customers, you have the employees who fill out who knows how many different forms on how to improve different processes in it. Centralize that down as best you can so that you can actually run through and build a tighter cluster of impacts that are pushing on people. You can even go to the point that you look at analytical feedback. If you look at someone's online activity and you watch them go from page A to page B to page A to page B to page A and they leave, they probably didn't have a good experience. If you can watch someone online and they call the call center within 5 minutes, they didn't have a good experience because they were forced into the call center. You can start to understand those. We did it where we clustered everybody that did a mobile confirmation. In other words, they did a payment on their phone, they got the mobile confirmation, and they called the call center within 5 minutes. We had 9,000 a week. Ends up, it was a simple design on Android where the complete button was below the line and everybody would hit the back arrow, which would take them back to the payment screen and zero it out. Once they made sure that that complete button was above the line, we reduced over 7,000 of those calls. It was $14 million that we were able to take out. But we could now actually understand what digital interactions made a call center pop. And then we could go call center to physical, so we could watch you how to go into the branches and why. Centralizing that allowed us to see that as we went through it. When you ask a customer about their experience, you can only ask them so many times in a visit, and then they have to want to respond. Why can't you actually enable a feedback anywhere button? So let's go back to, you're in the grocery store, you have an app for the grocery store, you're walking out of the grocery store, you can ping them, or you can allow a button so someone can go, you were out of milk. There was a mess here. Your products are out of date. Let them control when they want to feed back. You're going to get a lot more feedback, a lot more targeted, but you're also going to get a lot more negative feedback, because honestly, people really like to talk to you when they're not happy, not when they're happy. But you can turn that around, and someone walks out and says, hey, Teller Joe was great. Well, your visit's now located on your phone. Go to that visit, rate the visit, and tell us it was Joe. It's centralizing that process, but it's allowing the customer to control the feedback versus only when we reach out to you for that feedback. The final thing is you can build what's called an experience index score. I've heard it called a misery score, but it's the lifetime value of all the scores that someone has fed to you. So you can understand where they sit. Oh, they've had 50 good experiences and 1 bad experience versus 10 good experiences and 1 bad experience. Those are 2 different scores. And so you're able to rank through where someone sits, because let's be honest, if someone's had several bad experiences, the next time you interact with them, should you sell them something, or should you try to recover them better to get their experiences up so that when you do sell them something, they trust that you're doing it for their value? Like I said, this is a subject that's near and dear to me, and I'm covering it before we get into anything else, because if you don't start understanding your measurement, your whole process will get more complicated to actually show the value you're driving. When you think of performance, data accuracy, we don't live in a world of 100% accuracy. As soon as you enter information into a system, it's going to start to deteriorate. When you start sharing between multiple systems, it's really going to start deteriorating. Understanding that accuracy when you present a report out helps people trust that you're telling them as much as you know. And so one of the things we would do is we'd walk into the leadership team and go, here's what we found through our discovery. We're only about 60% confident on it. Do we continue to focus to drive it to a level of competency that you're comfortable making a decision? Or do we drop it? Or do you want to make a decision where we are? We were able to go through more cycles being able to explain the level of accuracy we thought than spending all our time on something to find out it didn't have any value to us at all. The final thing when you talk through these processes is you need to agree on what success is. I don't know how many times I've gone through, we've driven some type of insight, we've put it into production, we've shown it to people, and finance goes, I don't care. It's not valuable to me. Or the operations said it. If you don't go in understanding what success is, you have a harder road to go and drive that value through it versus getting teams to agree, and let's be honest, especially finance, on what the value is, and then being able to present it to them in such a way that they agree with it. All right. So now into kind of the meat of the subject, personalization. This was the gentleman I worked for at Disney. His name is Tom Boyles. Know your guest well enough at any point, place, and time, we know what to do next. So the end of the day is, how do we know a person well enough? I come from a very small farming town, graduated high school with 17 people. No one's beat me yet on small schools, by the way. My father owned a hardware store. Every person that walked in that store, he knew them. He knew pretty much how much money they had, how much they owed him, probably what they wanted in that store, how they wanted to be treated. He knew how to change the experience for those people. And you have to be good in a small town at doing that, because you can't run off too many customers before you're hungry. And so understanding how to personalize that experience to that person, that segment of one, whatever you want to call it, that's where I think of personalization. I also think when you think of this in an established business, you're going to hear me say this quote a lot, is think big, but start small, and then scale fast when you get to it. It's one of my key mantras going into everything is, I don't say agile because I probably butchered the textbook of agile, but the whole concept of small planned steps toward a defined goal is a lot better than a whole lot of work toward the defined goal and deploy it and it doesn't work as well. It drives your conversation, the personalization does, and it makes you be more relevant to a person. And so that kind of helps get through the process as we're doing it. Now, the next one is, of course, at scale. And the reality of the situation is, when we start to think about large organizations, there's a lot of friction. There's just things that aggravate people. There's uncertainty, there's frustration. And it's done by a lot. It can be skill sets. A banker filling out a form versus a tradesman filling out a form, there's a different set of skills they're looking in there. And so they need a different level of help to get through it. It can come down to training for both your customer and your employee, because at the end of the day, what we do is we train our customers to interact with us, hopefully in an intuitive way for them. But the reality of the situation is they also have to learn. Compliance and regulatory, end of the day, it is what it is, but we have to work around it. And if you learn how to work around it in a personalized manner, it becomes a strength, not a weakness. Because if you do it better than your competition who have the same compliance and regulatory settings, you get better at it. You need to think about the size and the offering and the dynamic nature of an organization. Disney, I forget how many billion permutations there are, but if you come to visit the property, when you get the welcome information, it's multiple billions of variations of what we can put in that recommendation that you get. It's just a large organization and has a large number of pieces, and it quickly grows. So understanding how to take all that information and synthesize it down to something that's relevant to you at that point in time is your goal of what you want to do. You just want to diminish that friction. You want to put information in front of your customer or your guest. You don't want to tell them what to do. You want to put enough information in front of them that you can explain good answers. You might want this resort, this resort, and this resort because they're kid friendly and they have good pools. And then let the customer drive off those small sets. When you provide answers to your employees and the customer sits down, the employee looks them up and they want to be relevant with them, and the information pops on the screen, or here are 5 things you might want to talk about with the customer. Don't tell your employees what to do. Give them good points to drive to and let them drive the conversation. But when you do that with your employees, or you do it with your customers, have feedback. Put the thumbs up, the thumbs down on the 5 suggestions you give the employee, so he can then provide feedback to you so that you can define your models better and better and better. End of the day, if we get this right, we simplify decisions, they trust the information we're giving them on a regular basis, the relationship will grow and the interactions are enhanced because we have more information on the relationship. We understand the person better. We're more personalized, and you start to build the value on top of that as you go through the process. End of the day, this is now we're getting into a little bit of the opinion side of it. Well, it's all kind of opinion, but a little more of the opinion side of, in my world, to do this, you need to enable situational awareness, whether that's digital, physical, or virtual. You need to understand your environment, and you need to understand how to react to it in a timely manner. It comes down to, you need to be relevant in timely interactions. You need to be situationally aware of what's going on around you. The second paragraph, you're more than welcome to read. It's a quote. It made a lot of sense to me, and that was in 2005. So things have only continued to grow and have continued to get harder and harder for people to think through as we talk about this. But situational awareness, that's what we're trying to enable. We're aware of what's going on around us, and we're able to adapt to it in a positive manner. Now, to enable it, at the end of the day, it's data-driven insights. And so back to the beginning of this, that's the core. To drive omni-channel and those relevant timely interactions, you gotta, to me, you activate the insights in a insights lifecycle from ingestion to optimization. The relevancy is reduce the option to a manageable volume, and timely, just appropriate time frame. So a lot of people will come through and start talking about real time. The reality of the situation is there's a phrase I use called near enough real time. What is fast enough for the situation you're trying to respond to? And the other side of that is the relevancy is understand your confidence in the data and how well you understand it, and tailor that message to that level of confidence. So if you think about Disney, if you're coming in September and I send you something and I say, come in September, you really love it, and you don't care, you throw it into the trash can. On the other hand, if you're in the park and you get a message about something to do and you're in Park A and we send you a message about Park B, you're aggravated. And so if you don't have the data to do that, then either dumb the message down about things to do in all the parks, or don't send the message. Sometimes best message in the world to send is just nothing. Just be quiet and listen. This is just to prove a point. It used to be, I thought, in the triangle. You had the business, you had the technology, and you had the mathematics. I honestly believe that we now pull data out, and it's its own discipline when you think about how to drive this at scale. Whether it's the data translators, the data engineers, anyone who handles the data that's loaded on the technology that the core mathematics teams are able to then go in and build models on to achieve your business objective. But you need to bring all four of these together, and you need to make sure they're aligned on what you're driving toward. Otherwise, the road just becomes a lot rougher and a lot harder as you go through the process. When you're building this, to me, I used to call it contact history, but it's a customer data and decisioning platform. And the idea behind this is when you think of your customer, you think of the human, you model it on human interactions and you chronologically order those and you go to your most granular level. Now, I say human very specifically because it does cover the employees, it does cover the customers, it covers the potential customers. It covers any digital action that can be captured and eventually traced back to a human. So if you think about a cookie, for however long we have those left, a cookie lands on your web page 6 times. Track that cookie, because while it's the same browser, if it logs in on the 7th trip, going back to your level of confidence, you're 50% confident those 7 prior visits were the same person who finally eventually logged in. If after 2-3 months that cookie never reappears, you can delete it. But the idea is it's at the human level and it's at the most granular. So when we initially did our first rollout at the bank, we saw web pages and then we saw click data. And so we just kept taking it to the most granular level we could so we could understand those interactions, and kind of builds right into that confidence-based scoring. Data deteriorates. Even if you think about going on a cruise ship where you have to show a passport, people get divorced and names change. So that data will deteriorate over time. Don't assume the data is 100%. Have a process in place to understand where the data sits. Data democratization. When you build these platforms, the first thing you need to do is go in and just obfuscate the hell out of any PII, PCI, any type of sensitive data. Put a repeatable hash key on top of it so that you can allow a larger audience access to your data without worrying about the security side of that data getting lost. And so this was easy to, we increased the number of people with access to the data when we did this 4 or 5 times because a larger audience could get to it. And when you think of data democratization, think of end user self-service. I mean, more and more people are coming out of uni today understanding basics in R from statistics. And so you have a larger group of people who can actually go and do their own discovery work, but they don't need the keys to the kingdom. So it's enabling them to self-serve themselves with data that's understood, but without actually handing them the account numbers, the credit card numbers, the person's name, the address, the email. All they're looking for is if somebody with name, with the hash name repeated 15 times did these actions, and here's what we think about them. And when we derive value from it, then you can turn around and actually activate who the person is and what you want to do with them. So the example I gave at the beginning, where we talked about digital actions driving call center phone calls, the gentleman who did that work was 24 years old. He was 1.5 years out of uni. He was doing reporting for the call center, sat down and spent time with the data scientist that worked for me, and 3 weeks later walked in and said, "Is this important?" And he had categorized all the digital interactions that drove calls to the call center. Obviously extremely important, but he was able to do that because we activated it for him. We didn't have to wait for him to fill out a request. The request goes to the data analyst. Data analysts pull all the data and information, and 17 weeks later, we might pull that information down. Will was done in 2 to 3 weeks. So it was very powerful from that side. Source from easy to hard. One of the gentlemen at Disneyland Paris used to say, "Steal with pride." If you've got a data warehouse, you've got a reporting database, you've got a defined MDM set of information on that data, when you initially start this out, don't go to the source. Don't make it hard. Don't make simple hard. Go grab it from the reporting areas. Bring that defined information so you understand the quality of the data over. Load it first, drive value from it, and use that value to start scaling fast. Don't, if you make it hard and you say, okay, we got to go to source and we got to pull, it makes it longer and you're not driving value sooner. And again, finance now has a reason to start to come out and cut your knees from underneath you. So, steal with pride, go from easy to hard. And so one of the ways we did it is we took the data from Teradata, we showed value from it. We then took the feed into Teradata and we grabbed it before it went into Teradata. And then based off value, we started to have the ability to get the funds and timing and resources to go to source systems to pull the information. The other one is support multiple languages. going in with a single language starts to hamstring you. So being able to support Java and Python and R and SQL and you name it into a single location allows a larger audience to get to that information and use it. And we were able to do that with a solution we brought in at the bank. We had all the languages we want to do the query, and it wasn't the Tableau versus ClickView argument. It wasn't SAS versus another solution. We had those. Now, with SAS, we had to move data over to the SAS environment, but we could organize it, move it to SAS environment, and let SAS do what it does really well. The neat thing that we were able to do out of this is we created data-driven journey maps. And what I mean by that is we had a digital footprint from when someone started looking for a product to when someone actually either consumed the product or finished the experience digitally. And the one at the time was a credit card activation. And so we were able to go through and find every person that started looking for that credit card and got the credit card. And then after spending 3 weeks getting all the noise out of there, which was most of our work, we then started a journey. We understood here's when they started looking, here's every interstate they took, every highway they took, every back road they took, here's the Appalachian Trail someone took, and here are people who started and stopped. Then we took the customer experience scores and overlaid that on there to even get a better understanding of how people were going through that journey. Once it was created, it was turned over to the business, and every day they could rerun it. Every week they reran it. But the idea was they now had a true journey map laid out in data that they could then supersede their knowledge and the information that wasn't digitally captured on to make better decisions on how to simplify and build that journey. Again, real time's great. It's got its place. Figure out how fast you have to go to achieve an objective. And so that's what I mean by near enough real time. If I ever slip and say nerd, don't laugh at me, but that's just my process and how I think through it as I go through those pieces. Now, to stick on top of all this, you need a decision matrix. And there's a gentleman named John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot in the 60s, who created either ODA or UDA. You pick what you want when you go through that process. It just breaks decisioning down into consumable chunks. And so you have your data collection, turn data into information, establish relevant information from the interactions, and have a way to communicate. The idea is you capture your data. You go through and you do your orientation, whether it's explicit or it's modeled, it's however you go through that. Your orientation sets up what you know about a person. When we talked about getting stronger, one of the steps in there is historical experiences. So the more you interact, the better we're able to understand because we can build stronger models and we understand those propensities. The decision comes back to, the decision is almost a hypothesis in most cases. So you think through, you say decision, if I do Y, the customers will do X. And you go through that. This is where people interject gut decisions into modeling. So if you think about it, if you interject your gut and you override the model, you actually start to introduce noise into it. And so it can get worse. The old saying of no SQL. So back in the early 2000s, when they thought everyone was sure SQL was going away, it really stood for not only SQL. And so what I like to say is no gut, not only gut, bring your gut in. Matter of fact, it's the driving force. Put those gut decisions into the model and allow the model to actually drive out the value from that. Again, start small, tailor your message to the value of the data and see how it responds and back up and figure out what to do. And remember, one of the best decisions is to do nothing. It's just to load it back into the observation and send it back through until it's time to act. Act is obviously just sending it to the appropriate channel in a timely manner, whether that's your physical, your virtual, or your digital, while remembering that those are starting to blur. We're now on the phone with a call center while we're on the computer. We're on our phone while we're sitting in the physical location. You can start in single channel thought, but you need to start understanding you're probably going to have someone looking on a device while they're talking to you. And how do you start to blend that and understand that? Or you can have someone looking on the competition's device. And so or competition's digital solution, how do you start to understand that that's happening and how do you adapt around it? At the end of the day, the situational awareness is good, but the faster you complete this loop, the faster you're able to make your decisions, the better your decisions are. So you do want to speed the ODA loop up. And what you're trying to do is actually perform your decision faster than your customer can perform his decision. And so while they're still trying to figure it out, you say, here are 5 suggestions. Oh, thanks, I'll take this one. If you can continue that through the process, so you start to create almost a chatbot environment, you're helping your customer more and more and more as you go through that process. There are probably a 10,000 decision matrix out there. This is one I like. This is one I grab to. This is one I tend to use on a regular basis as we go through the process. It's just my guide. It helps me break steps down into consumable pieces because this is a big undertaking. And so, how do you eat an elephant? One step at a time. This helps me break that into single steps, think through the process, solve solution 1, move to solution 2. Look for the simple solution, drive the simple solution, but understand how it scales as you start to move up and through the process. This is just Boyd's framework. And I know Brad's got the link to this that he can send out to you. It's called Command and Control. I forget how many pages, and it's written in military terms, but the thought process behind it was just incredible. And like I said, the decision part of it, that's your hypothesis. That's where the gut gets interjected into it. The points over orientation, they're not perfect. They're not, they're not comprehensive. And in some cases, they might not even be the right pieces. But the idea is there are a bunch of points that you use in orientation to make facts known about the customer that you want, that you then take into the decision process to figure out what to do with those. So historically, you can go through and say a customer looked at a mortgage on the web page. Next time they log in, let's make sure that's one of the first things we put in front of them. It's not real time. It's you made that decision at night. It's just waiting for them to trip the tripwire of logging in, and the mortgage information comes up for them. On top of that, when I think about the technical principles as we go through this process, none of this should be brand new or anything like that, but making sure you're scalable. Make sure what you got you can grow, because you're going to either need more data or more processing power, or another channel is going to come in that you need to, or other data sources. Don't lock yourself in. Be careful with proprietary. I'm a big believer in just making sure you're open on that side of the house, especially just getting locked in. And building on top of that's that nimble piece. As you go through this test and learn, you think of that think big, start small, scale fast. Scaling fast means you're learning and you're constantly saying, oh, that didn't work. Ooh, that didn't work. And it's adjusting around that. The whole concept of near enough real time, I think I've covered that. The accuracy, just make sure you understand how accurate you are. I'm a big believer in simple is the ultimate sophistication. Don't make simple hard. Think through and make sure you're driving toward easy, small processes that can be stitched together to make a complicated piece work. Now this I love leveraging best in class. And so the idea behind this is, if it's not your core business, it's not what differentiates you from the competition, and it is commoditized and it's something you can go and purchase, is it worth the time to try to build your own version of it? Or is it better to actually go pick that up and spend more of your time integrating that version into what you're building? That comes down to the situation. It comes down to preferences. It comes down to a lot of things, but I just personally am a big believer in that. And finally, it's a program. Don't go through personalization thinking you're done. You're never done. Whether it's deploying machine learning on top of your model so that constantly each week you can come in and see where the machine made some decisions, and you go in and you change those so the model updates weekly instead of annually. Whether it's different channels you're reaching to, different lines of business, whatever that is, it's, technology changes. It's constantly moving and it's fluid, and you go through the process. If you think about something like Disney, where you not only have a theme park that has a cruise line and theme parks and a vacation club and Adventures by Disney, you then add in, oh, by the way, they've got the Disney ABC television group, and you've got the whole internet group, and now you've got, not only do you have the movie franchise, but you have the movie franchise that has Marvel, that has Star Wars, and the Pixar family. It's constantly growing. It's constantly evolving. Some of it, some of the things like the interactive and the digital, you're visiting constantly. Think of a theme park. It's done every couple of years at best. And so understanding how that moves through those and adapting and adjusting to that. Some parting thoughts. Align your insights to business goals. Again, it's harder if you don't have buy-in from your senior leadership on what they're measured on. Recognize data quality and align your message appropriately. You can't have, it's not black and white. You can't have 100% anymore. You're going to have to say, I only think this is 60%. I'm dumbing the message down. I'm gonna try it on a small audience. I'm gonna see how it works. I hammered think big, start small, scale fast, but it's one of my big pieces. Again, one step at a time. If you try to look at the end of this, you think you're boiling in the ocean. Consumable chunks that you actually work your way through. Focus on your core business. Don't build a cloud because you think it's cool. If there's a cloud, you can purchase it and it's not your core of what you do. You know, a lot of people, oh, we want to be like Apple or we want to be like Google. Yet they don't want to put the investment of the last 15 to 20 years building that solution with the engineers. If it already exists, just focus on that. Last but not least, common sense is not common. And I said it at the beginning, I'll say it now. I've got 1,500 skydives. I don't think stepping out of an airplane is what bad or dangerous. Yet the majority of people think that that's dangerous. It's what's my norm versus what's your norm as you work through the process. Couple of things. The John Boyd's OODA loop is there. The other one is the value of dyslexic. I have dyslexia, so if you found spelling mistakes in this presentation, I won't be surprised or offended. But E&Y in England put out a really good report on the value of dyslexia, and it is a strength in problem solving that I think I've been able to utilize through my career. But it also is a way for me to apologize if I did make a misspelling or anything like that. And it also messes with my pronunciation from time to time. So I'll end there, and I went a little longer than I intended. I apologize.